Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. I'm Alan Miller. I'm hosting today, and we have a return guest. He was here about 10 months ago. And Ken Martin, who chairs the Minnesota DFL Party, always an interesting guest, very inspiring speaker. If you get a chance to hear Ken on the stump, he is really an inspiring speaker.
Thank you.
But last time you were here, we had just come off, well, an election, certainly 2012, where you cleared the table. You won it all. The presidency, Senator Franken, both houses of the Minnesota legislature. What's left for you to do?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I'm not in my job to just win elections. That's clearly what I'm here to do, but it's about what you do with that power once you actually gain it.
And I should mention Governor Dayton also, because you chaired his campaign.
That's right. I am really proud of the DFLers in the state legislature and our DFL congressional delegation. When you look back on what we were able to do this last legislative session, it was remarkable.
It was remarkable. It was an incredible session.
Yeah, and you know, the last probably decade or two in terms of the legislature, there has never been a legislature probably that has accomplished so much. And that's because DFLers said, you know, we are actually going to go up and we're going to govern. We're going to focus on some of these big issues that are facing our state, and we're going to be bold, and we're going to do things that help build this state and build a better Minnesota. And think about this. The litany is long. The list is long of things that were accomplished. From early childhood education. We've been talking about early childhood education in this state for 30 years. And now, because of DFLers in the legislature, we made a first-time investment in early childhood education. All-day kindergarten. You see, the Republicans in this state, they like to pick winners and losers. Democrats said, no more are we going to say that if you're born into privilege or you were born into a wealthy school district that happens to offer up all-day kindergarten, can you get that? Now, wherever you live, no matter where you live in the state, you get access to all-day kindergarten.
And of course, the statistics indicate clearly that early childhood ed and all-day kindergarten are things that give 12-to-1 returns.
That's right.
They absolutely put those children ahead of or maybe put them where they should be, and they don't get it otherwise, as the rest of the world has moved past us in so many categories.
That's right. And you know, we made a commitment, both Republicans and Democrats in this state, some 40 years ago in the early 70s, the Minnesota Miracle. This idea that the way we make Minnesota prosperous and great, and not just a cold Omaha, is to basically invest in education, that would become the cornerstone of what distinguishes Minnesota from all the other states in this great union. And we did that for so many years. Republicans and Democrats came together and said, that's going to be the bedrock of our state, and we're going to make significant investments there. Yet in the last 10 years of Republican control in this state, before the DFL retook the majorities last year, we saw continued cuts to our education system in this state. Now, thanks to the governor, we've actually started to turn the corner, and DFL legislators who've made education a commitment again, we're starting to reinvest. Significant investments in our K-12 education system. As I mentioned, all-day kindergarten, early childhood education, freezing college tuition. You can go down the list of things that happened this year, but significant amongst them is our commitment to restoring that cornerstone of what makes this state great, and that's education. But, you know, there are a number of other things.
Another thing
Yeah.
that I want to talk about, because I just saw a Republican on television saying that, oh, the state's going to have a surplus this year. Well, that's thanks to us. The fact of the matter is, the Republicans borrowed billions of dollars from schools
Right.
that forced school levies, that forced people to have to pay more in their own areas. And incredibly, in 2 years here, with this latest surplus, I guess it's a prediction, but it looks pretty certain, that's going to be all paid back. And the state is still going to have, what, $750, $800 million surplus. Well, I hope we don't squander that surplus as we did under Pawlenty, and we did certainly under Jesse Ventura.
That's right. Well, I think in addition to all the things I was mentioning, the fact that our state is outpacing all the other states in the country in terms of our economic activity. We've recovered faster than any other state in the country from the Great Recession. Our unemployment rate is one of the lowest in the country. We're adding jobs in this state. We're making investments in the communities and the people of this state. And that's with the leadership of Governor Dayton and the legislators in the DFL caucuses. The reality is you know, the governor was elected in 2010 in a very difficult time economically, and through his leadership, even under Republican control, he was able to put together budgets that helped move this state forward. And it's very disingenuous for the Republicans to claim anything that any of these successes are a result of their policies. The reality, and you hit this on the head, is under Republican control for many years in the legislature, and then under Governor Pawlenty, it's been smoke and mirrors and gimmicks and cost shifts and anything they can do to raid different pots of money to balance the budget, rather than addressing the underlying issues.
Tobacco money, it's another
that's
one
right.
they robbed.
Right. How do we...
Legacy money.
That's
I
right.
mean, really, wherever they could get money,
Right.
they took it. And of course, I had, when Pawlenty, before, I guess when he became governor also, he used to be here quite often, and we talked about the fact that he says no new taxes. Taxes will not go up. And I said, well, suppose you call it a fee, you call it an assessment, you call it an add-on. No matter what you do, it's still hitting the people in the pocketbook.
Right.
It's a tax.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is that has died in the last 2 years, and it has died because we have some wonderful legislators who are really dedicated, and unfortunately, it's become so partisan.
It has become partisan, but I think more than even the partisanship is the idea for me that's I want to see elected officials of both parties who believe that government has a role in people's lives. And frankly, there's only one party by and large anymore that believes that, and that's the Democratic Party. And when you send people to Washington or to St. Paul who fundamentally, as these Republicans do, believe that government doesn't have a role in people's lives, it lends to this polarization, this toxicity, because their only goal is not to try to fix problems or help people in this state or in this country, but their only goal is to dismantle all of the great things that have been accomplished over the years by so many.
We see that with the U.S. House of Representatives right now, which has passed 55 bills in the last 2 years, mostly of little consequence, except several times where their feet were held to the fire by the public. And we're paying, literally, they talk about saving money, billions of dollars for these legislators, and all they want to do, well, they can't beat Obama because he's won a second term, but that's what Mitch McConnell said in the Senate going in. That's all we want to do is make sure he doesn't get a second term. So he got a second term.
Right.
The people were smarter. Now all they want to do is stifle everything he does.
Well,
And
this has become a game to some, and it's about making sure that the other side doesn't win. Instead of addressing the issues and the problems that the people of this country and this state are facing on a daily basis, you have partisans who would rather win and score political points. And that's their idea of success.
And get corporate money at the same time, and lobbyist money, and have lobbyists write your bills for you, and be beholden to ALEC instead of to the Constitution of the United States and the oath that they took, which infuriates me.
Now, there are certainly some Democrats who are just as culpable in this, and the reality is this is not a game. This is, as Paul Wellstone used to say, politics is not about big money or special interests or power games. Politics is about the improvement of people's lives. And when you step back for a second and think about that, it's true. If you are an elected official and you're not up there to make people's lives better, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, then what are you doing up there? And that's really the point we've gotten to in Washington. And you counter that. It's almost like a tale of two governments, Alan. One in Washington that's full of dysfunction and toxicity and people trying to game the system and score political points. And one here
perpetuate their own reelection.
That's right.
And just feather their own nest while they're doing it.
That's right. But when you compare that to what's happening here in St. Paul, it's just a remarkable difference. I've said on the stump a few times that it's remarkable what happens when you elect people who care about governing. You get good government. And that's what's happened. When you elected Mark Dayton and Paul Thiessen and Tom Bach and all the rest of the DFL legislators, we actually have balanced the budget in a fair way. We have a surplus now. We've made significant investments in our schools. Property taxes here in Dakota County, in my home city of Eagan, are going down thanks to increased local government aid and thanks to the direct property tax relief provided by Democrats in the legislature. We have a number of great accomplishments from a MNsure site that's a model the nation providing health care coverage to all Minnesotans. You can go down the list, but this last legislative session it can be marked by the fact that the Democrats made promises in 2012, and we kept those promises.
And one of the things that troubles me, and you certainly hit upon one of the most important with MNsure, our governor took the federal money. There are states that desperately need it, Texas and some of the southern states, where the governors turned it down. Those people are really, really searching for a lifeline now.
No, it's a perfect example of what we're talking about, Alan, though, is you have Republican governors in these states who would rather score political points than help the people that they were elected to serve. Millions of Texans who are uninsured who could benefit from a great health care exchange. Yet the Republicans in that state decided we're not going to take the federal money, we're not going to invest in any sort of expansion of health care in this state, even though it would benefit the citizens we were elected to serve, because we want to make President Obama and the Democrats in Washington look bad. How does that help build our country for the future?
And what do they offer? They don't offer anything in exchange.
Right.
That's really what's most troubling to me, is the fact that you would hope that they would have at least an alternative plan, but they don't. They don't offer things that are going to help education, health care. I mean, we have got Romney Care now in the United States, but it's bad. According to the Republicans, it was good when Romney did it in Massachusetts. It's absolutely ludicrous. Right. And we have corporate money really flowing into this state also that really can distort things. One of the things that troubles me very much is that people are not as well informed as they used to be. We seem to be in a soundbite society. People don't read papers anymore.
That's right.
People get their news in bursts, and I listen to Fox News as much as I can because, number one, it's good for my blood pressure, and I was watching them last night on the Hannity program, and they just blatantly come out with falsehoods and distortions, and people who follow that don't have the sense to look for the truth and the answers.
Yeah, that's
and you vote against your own self-interest when you do that.
You know, and we're blessed here in Minnesota that we have an electorate that is a little bit more informed and engaged. We have a high voter turnout. A lot of the stuff that flies in other states doesn't necessarily fly in this state. So in some ways you can have a more substantive conversation, a more issue-based conversation. But we see that that's been slipping over the years as well. And you're absolutely right that this rush to appeal to sort of base instinct and to pull one over on the voters has been happening in campaigns and elections for many years, but has really taken
Without conscience.
Right.
Really, just to lie.
That's right.
Look in the camera and lie. We have a Secretary of State who's not running for re-election this time, whose really main focus was to get as many eligible people to the polls as he possibly could, and did a marvelous job.
Yes, he did.
And is still coming up with ideas to get people to the polls. All sorts of attacks.
Well,
He
you know,
handled
yeah.
the Franken recount
Dayton
that was really a
recount.
model for the whole country.
That's right.
Attacked.
Right. Well, it's a shame, and you know, I read something yesterday. What's the Republican? Now the Republicans are going around trying to eliminate early voting periods in states that allow early voting. And what's the argument? We don't want to allow people to vote early, right?
And it's not fraud.
No.
I
Look,
think-
I've mentioned this to you before. I ran Governor Dayton's recount effort here. Millions of dollars spent in litigation on both sides of that effort. And 2 years prior to that, millions of dollars spent in the Franken recount, right? And in not one instance was there found any evidence of voter fraud in this state. Yet you have some in the Republican Party who claim that there's massive voter fraud in the state of Minnesota. And that's why we should have things like photo ID. Well, I think that matter was litigated last year. The voters of this state said loud and clear that, one, we don't believe your arguments. They're just false and they're not true. But two, it was a solution in search of a problem. We don't need to do that, particularly when it would have disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans, hundreds of thousands of Americans in around the country now in states that do require photo ID are basically prevented from voting, and that's wrong. We should be doing everything we can to encourage people to vote, to participate in their democracy. Regardless of their party affiliation, regardless of their background, we should be making sure that their fundamental right, this is a right, should not be infringed upon. Yet Republicans, some Republicans, not all, some Republicans have continued, despite what the voters of this state said last year, continue to try to push efforts to infringe on that right for people to vote.
Well, 6 years ago, there were about 6 or 7 Republicans who crossed over and voted with the Democrats for a very important, I think it was the budget issue. They, led by Governor Pawlenty, they purged all of those people from the Republican Party for exercising their obligation under the oath. They threw them out.
Right.
They can't tolerate that.
Well, you know, the difference between our party and theirs is when I was first elected, my counterpart, Tony Sutton, sent a letter to the Republican legislators and said, if you vote for any revenue increase, we're going to strip you of your endorsement and we're going to run people against you in the primary. What that ended up doing is setting up a dynamic where those elected officials, those Republican elected officials, felt a sense of duty and responsibility to the party they serve versus the oath that they took to the people that they were elected by. You should never set up that dynamic, which is why you don't find me twisting DFL legislators' arms, telling them how they should vote. The DFL elected officials, they don't work for me. They work for the people who elected them, including the Republicans and independents and Greens in their districts who voted for them. And so, you know, my job is to help get Democrats elected and then, you know, to encourage them from time to time to continue to work hard on the issues we care about, but not to
be
banish
dictatorial.
them. That's right. That's exactly right.
And really, that is in large part the difference between the two parties.
I think so.
But what can we do as Democrats and people who are really interested in fair government to get the people more involved, to get the people more interested. Most of radio and television is owned by right-wing corporations. It becomes very hard. There are very few Janet Roberts out there who will take her own fortune and put it on the line for an AM 950 or an MSNBC.
But it's programs
for
like this that are important. And frankly, in the age of the internet now, it's social media and making sure that people are pushing back against these lies and the Republican attacks. And so, you know, it is really important to inform voters, to educate them, and to tell them the truth. And that's what we're doing here. That's my job as the DFL chair, is to go around wherever we can and make sure that we hit back against some of the attacks and the lies that are being promulgated out there. But I will tell you, one thing we can't lose sight of is how important it is to show up to the polls, because at the end of the day, that's really what matters, is who wins. Elections have consequences. It's not about winning that race, as I said earlier.
We see
it's
that
about
from the 2012 elections.
It's about what happens and what policies are implemented and how that impacts people's lives and what people do with that power or will do with that power. It's very clear what the Republican agenda is, and it's not to help the middle class prosper. It's not to help the impoverished in this country. It's to help the wealthy and the big corporations in this country.
And the rest, drown them in the bathtub.
That's right.
And they are more beholden to that philosophy of Grover Norquist than they are to their oath of office. And that's really, really what distresses me. And, you know, I want to cry out to people and say, pay attention to what's going on here, because it's your lives that are going to be damaged. It's your children who are going to suffer from an environment that's going to choke them to death. We see what's happening in China. You can't just not pay attention to this.
Well, that's absolutely right. But in terms of the electoral piece, so we do need to fight back on this, these attacks and these lies. But we also need to make sure that people are motivated, they're mobilized, they're informed, and they're going to turn out for the election. And so one of the things that keeps me up at night is thinking about a midterm election. The 6th year of a president for the party in power is normally the most brutal election for that party. And so this election, when you couple that with the fact that we have two guys on the top of our ticket, and Senator Franken and Governor Dayton, who both won their respective races by recount, this could be a very tough year for Democrats. And I think oftentimes we get a little too complacent. We think, well, things are going well, we have power in this state and we've used it well to help people, and President Obama is pushing a great agenda for people in Washington, and people should recognize that, by God, and we should win because of that. Well, that's a real bad attitude to have. We know that next year the drop-off in our base is going to be very precipitous. And so what I want you and your viewers to do is to make sure that we fight back hard, but that we don't lose sight that we've got to talk to Democrats. We got to mobilize and energize Democrats to turn out to the polls next year.
And independents.
Yeah, that's right.
And Republicans of conscience who really care about the welfare of the state and of their families.
That's
and
right.
The future. And really, it becomes a big task, but it's one that's so important, because that one vote that you have can make the difference. Talk about the Dayton election. Talk about the Franken election. Just a few votes.
That's right.
Made the difference there.
312 votes for Senator Franken, 8,750 votes for Governor Dayton. Regardless of what your political ideology is, when you stay home and you don't exercise your franchise and vote, you're really, really doing yourself and your community and your country a disservice. So, but for us in particular, for the DFL, our big strategic imperative going into 2014 is to make sure that our Democratic base is excited and energized by our candidates and the issues, and that we start to appeal to those independent and sensible Republicans, as you said, who know that we're on the right side of the issues.
And very important, because we know that money is going to be a big factor. We know that out-of-state money is going to pour in here. We know that we're going to get hit with all sorts of distorted commercials that we need the money to respond to. Tell people what they can do about getting some money back with their political donations
That's
this year.
right. You know, thanks to both parties, frankly, in the legislature, they reinstituted a program called the Political Contribution Refund Program. And in this day and age of large-scale independent expenditure organizations spending hundreds of millions of dollars that's unaccountable to the voters, this program coming back into place allows the average person in this state, the grassroots, to contribute money, have a voice in their process, and get some of that back from the state. So if you give $50 to a candidate or to a political party, you will get a receipt from that candidate or political party back, and you will then get that $50 per person or $100 per couple refunded by the state of Minnesota.
That's very important
Well,
for
it is.
people to know that.
Particularly in this day and age, again, of all of the big money from outside groups coming in to try to buy and influence elections, it's important that we keep the equilibrium balanced so that average people in this state still have a voice in the political process.
And the third branch of government, the courts, are so important. We see how a 5-4 vote in the Supreme Court has given us some horrendous decisions. When we listen to some of these judges like Scalia and some of the things that they have to say, and you realize that he should have been on the farm years ago. But be that as it may, then we look to our Supreme Court, which is looked at throughout the state, and look at the 2 appointments that have been made by the Governor Dayton so far. Wilhelmina Wright, who, she was on the show here, and she's an outstanding human being.
Yes.
And now the latest one, and a man who's been here many times as a lawyer, who now is going to be back with us in a few months as a Supreme Court judge, David Lillehog,
Yes.
who was one of the top lawyers around, but a man of great integrity, a great honesty. He's going to step right into the spot that Paul Anderson left and do it honor. And that's what's important to people to know.
Yes. Well, it's important, again, just to remind folks that elections have consequences. And when you vote for a president who has the authority to appoint Supreme Court justice, you can see how that has a ripple effect, and we end up with decisions like Citizens United. We end up with other decisions that end up impacting millions of people's lives. And that's the same can be said for what happens in the state of Minnesota. And the consequences are far-reaching, and people shouldn't forget that elections are important and politics are important. They can get nasty, and certainly the ads and the mailers and the phone calls are probably at some point a little overwhelming for people. But folks have to remember that democracy is not a spectator sport, and those who show up
seek the truth.
That's right.
Search out the truth.
That's right.
Check the facts. Don't
Yep.
believe what you see on the screen or what you hear over the phone, because so many times it is engendered just to be prejudicial and to keep you from the polls. We've got to get people to the polls. Ken Martin, chair of the Minnesota DFL, it is always a pleasure.
Thank
We've
you,
got
Alan.
to do this again
Anytime.
soon.
Yes.
And we've got to keep it going. Access to Democracy. Join us and participate in your democracy.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, mics are down. They'll run the credits through us.
Good job.